Welcome back to Reynolds Runabouts, everybody. This week we're going to launch into the continuing restoration of my 1957 Wondercraft 14-foot runabout built by Clyde Paul in Holland, Michigan in 1957. I've started and stopped on this boat many times since 2002, and finally I'm in my new shop and I'm ready to finish it for the spring boat shows here in Michigan. First thing I'll do is I'll give you a tour of where the boat is right now and some of the things I've had to fix since I started in 2002, and then what I'm going to be doing going forward. So let's get to work. So this is where the boat is today. Before moving recently, I put stain on the deck after putting bungs into the plywood to cover the fasteners, and found out when I brought it out just lately that the bungs had halos. And I've never had that happen before, but I suspect it has to do with the fact that I had probably a dull countersink when I put in my fasteners, which it drills the hole, and then it also gives it a nice hole around it for the bung to go in, and then you insert the bung of the proper size that the cutter will make. Unfortunately, I think my cutter was either dull or my original countersink was dull. So what I did is I popped out all the bungs that were on the boat in the areas that are going to be stained and varnished again. I popped them out and went ahead and enlarged the hole and the bung and reinserted all of them so that the halos were reduced, and I could be happy with another stain job. So this week I'm going to finish sanding this Akume plywood, which is very forgiving when it comes to plywood. You can sand on it for a very long time and not burn through, and that's good because I'm going to have to sand this down to a more of a white tan finish. Here's an example of what you can do if you sand it too much. That's called burn through. Because it's a 5-ply, you can go through one ply and into another, which is going another direction. This is fine where I burned through. I did that on purpose to get an idea of how close I could get in my sanding without burning through on the rest of the deck that will be finished bright. And this area that I burned through, along with the rest of the boat going around, will be used. I will be using paint to do kind of a white cover board. And as you can see here, a white king plank. I've left this rough. As you can see, the holes are not filled yet or faired, and I'll be doing that so that I can get a nice fair finish that will finish fair into the mahogany, and then I'll tape it when I do the varnish and the painting, so it'll be a nice crisp finish. To fill these holes, I will be using TotalFair by TotalBoat. I really like that product. It's a 1-to-1 mix. You mix it together the size you need, and you just proceed to fill the holes. So I'll get at it. So when I use TotalFair, I keep it simple. I have a B paddle and an A paddle, so I never mix these two anywhere where they're going to react and then ruin the batch. So what I do is I always open up part B, make sure I got the part B. It comes in a really nice tub that you can get into. And this is not to, I'm not sponsored by TotalFair. I just really come to like this product. So I get enough that I know I can deal with. I don't want to get too much out because it does set up, you know, in relatively fast. It gives you a lot of open time, but I just keep it small in case there's an interruption or something. I don't have to stop and then waste another product. And if it's not catalyzed with each other, it will stay on that paddle. It'll stay soft. So then I have an A paddle, and these are just flexible putty knives that you get. And then what I do is I put it on an area that doesn't touch the blue. I get it off there. And then I have a separate paddle, more of a fairing item that I use to mix. And you just put blue with yellow till you get green. It's a little stiff. Keep my shop at 60. So it's a little stiffer than maybe you'll find in the summer. Then I just go ahead and I mix that up till I get a good consistent green, or pea green, off green. And this will give you the putty that you're after. I try to get most of it around my palette here just to keep it mixed up. Make sure you get all of it, because you'll notice that there's blues and yellows kind of hiding on the knife and on your palette. So you just want to make sure you just keep moving it like bread, kind of knead it till you really get it going. And then I can see I'm getting my blue out of there. Because what you want is a good, thorough mix. You don't want anything that didn't get catalyzed hanging out in there. And then once you get to this point, you should have already cleaned the plywood with a vacuum. And in my case, I used a little bit of acetone just to give the surface even deeper clean so that I didn't have any contaminants. Even though most of your fill is going into the fastener holes. Got silicone bronze driven in here. And I used 3M 5200 to fasten the plywood to the frames beneath. I still use silicone bronze as just a good practice and preservation for boats. And I like the fact that I've got another fastener in addition to the 5200, so it gives me a nice comforting feeling. I know this deck isn't going anywhere. So then you got your fill, your TotalFair ready to go. And you don't want much. You want to just get enough in there. And it depends. I have smaller paddles sometimes I'll use. Depends on what I'm doing, but I'm really trying to just fill and press. Make sure I get the air out of there. And you might have to go back again. This is not maybe just a one-time thing. I will probably fair this at least twice. And you're just trying to squeeze it on there. And you don't want to leave a lot, because this stuff gets very hard. And you're going to want to go back and clean this up after a while before it hardens, because it's very hard to sand. So what I'm going to do is just do all the areas that I have to fair, both on the king plank and the fasteners that will be covered by paint. So that'll be what I'll be doing for the next few minutes. King plank, which you saw on the time lapse. And then I continued with another batch and worked my way around the boat, because these are the holes that will be covered by a white covering board, which was common on these plywood boats. So you didn't have a true covering board, you had a painted one. So much like the more expensive runabouts, which used a real piece of lumber, the plywood was just made to look like it had a king plank. Now, the deck has a true king plank because that's where the plywood on the original boat was terminated. And then he had I think it was probably an 1/8 inch or more king plank that he put on top. And I thought that was just way too much. It was way too proud on the deck and kind of ruined the look. So that was one liberty I took in restoring this boat, was to put the king plank flush with the mahogany decking so that it was just a little more aesthetically pleasing. So the next step will be to let this dry overnight, and then I will go at it with some probably 80 grit, maybe 120. I'll have to see what cuts the epoxy filler the best, because this area will be painted. I don't have to worry about burning through, but I don't really want to get too aggressive with sandpaper. So it's always good to start out maybe with 120. If that's not working, then work my way down to 80. So I'll have to hit that next. So it's the next morning, and I've come back down to the shop, and the TotalFair by TotalBoat is hard and sandable. I looked on the packaging, and it doesn't say wait time on sanding. I know about 15 minutes in, I noticed that the fairing compound was getting thick, and so that was a good timing. I had like a golf ball size group of filler that I was using, so that worked out pretty good for me, and that's about how fast I work. So I let it set all night, and it has done really well, and now I'm ready to sand, and I'm going to go back to my 120 grit. I use the Mirka brand on my flexible sanding. It gives me a little bit of flexibility on the deck without having a hard board, which might burn through this plywood pretty easy. There's a lot of camber on this deck, so I want to make sure I always have the ability to kind of move with that camber. So what I did, you just put your sandpaper on, and I started working on the areas that I kept pretty clean. After I got done, I went back with my putty knife and I just kind of cleaned up the residue that didn't need to be there, but I left enough to do what I needed to do, so I could sand and not have to sand a lot. And as you can see, the TotalFair really sands well. I've had worse epoxy fillers that I've used, more automotive, auto body type things. Some were marine. A couple things about this I like how it sands, I like how it goes down, I like how it mixes, I like how it smells. Some of the epoxy fillers I've used are really hard to work around without a mask. And this one, I will use a mask when I do sanding. The one thing about cleanup is I use acetone. TotalFair makes a brand called Eco Solvent, which is an acetone, but it smells better than acetone, which is saying a lot if you've ever worked with acetone. Even with the Eco Solvent yesterday when I was cleaning up my tools, I had to put my mask on because it doesn't, usually things like epoxy don't bother me the way you smell and nausea, but that does. So I cleaned up my tools, and then I put my mask away and I left the shop for the evening. So over the evening, it ventilated out pretty well, so I was okay with that. I know I've seen other YouTube creators like Mark on Nomad Boat Building. He uses alcohol a lot, and Mark will put it in like a small dish soap dispenser, so it has a lid, and he's able to squeeze it on his rags that he's using quite easily, and the smell is a lot better when it comes to humans. So you can also use that as well. It does just as good if the stuff is fresh. So I use the acetone to clean the wood and fiberglass before I paint and apply filler, but you can also use alcohol pretty easily too, and it's more readily available and cheaper. So that's a tip. So I'm gonna get back to sanding. So I'm back working on the deck after coat number 2 of the TotalFair by TotalBoat. The second coat, I put blue tape down on my king plank area, even though it's going to get painted. If you use tape, it kind of gives you some guidelines when you're applying the TotalFair, so you don't stray into it, because you know that's going to be an area that's going to be bright or stained and varnished. So I put the tape down, and then what I'll do is it also protects the that area. If you were to hit it with the sandpaper, it's going to hit the tape, and you'll have a pretty good idea where you're at on, burn through. I doubt you'll hit it that hard, but kind of gives you some guidelines. And it's blue tape, it's easy peel. It sticks as much as you need it to, but it doesn't stick too much, which with plywood you could pull the top coat of the mahogany veneer off, so you have to be careful about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand down the king plank, and you can see I've done all the, I'm also going to go back over most of the fastener holes that I filled with the second coat of TotalFair. That will be covered by white paint. It does have a little shrinkage to it, so when I put it on, I was, I had it flat, even a little prouder, I guess, than most, but it does shrink, and you'll find when you go back and you do the first sanding and the second sanding, sometimes you'll notice that it has some concave areas in those fastener holes, so you'll want to go and hit it just with a light coat of TotalFair, and then once you hit that, the third time you should be done, if not the second. So back to work. So I've completed the sanding of both the fastener holes around the covering boards. I did that by hand. It wasn't that thick, so it was a lot easier with the sand block. The king plank, I elected to use my Orbital. I use a DEWALT Orbital with Diablo brand paint or paper. It has the holes, which is a tremendous help when you're using any vacuum. I use my shop vac by Craftsman, and I also, or shop vac, and then I use a HEPA filter and then a bag, which makes tremendous difference in the dust in the shop. I hardly have any, and then I wear a dust filter on my face just for redundancy. But you can see I did the king plank, took it down with the Orbital 120 grit. No dust. Took down a few areas that were proud, burned through, but that's fine because I'm not doing anything but painting this. Here's a burn through, but it's flush or fair, and that's what I wanted. All this came out fair too as well. So now my king plank and my deck, where the two meet, are fair, and that's what I wanted. There might be a few spots, but I don't see any that filler would help versus maybe just using primer and doing some fine filling maybe when the primer's on. You'll notice when you use primer on paint jobs, it shows a lot of sins, holidays, which are spots you missed, meaning you took a holiday or your sandpaper did. So those are pretty obvious. And then when we get to the primer stage for this king plank, I can show you how to do that well too with using just spray paint, so you always know where your fairing has been, where your primer's been touched and where it hasn't. And that also helps you get a better look, because anyone will tell you 90% of a great looking boat project is the sanding and the fairing and the sanding and the priming and the sanding and the prep before you get to the very expensive paint. So I'm gonna vacuum the boat and move on. So I've got the deck faired on top to the point where I'm gonna leave it until some final sanding when I turn it back over to do varnish, which will be one of the last steps before I complete the boat. So I've moved on to fairing the deck on the edges where the rub rail has to go. This area here will get a thin mahogany wooden rub rail that will cover this plywood to deck or hull seam. It'll be faired in, and then I will put on a 3/4 inch or maybe a 1/2 inch, what they call half round aluminum molding, which will give it that splash of brilliance, as well as providing more protection to the boat and to the inner mahogany rub rail. So what I've done is I've taken my Orbital sander with some 80 grit and been very carefully moving my way along the rub rail until I get to the blue tape. That is where I know the hull is. So I take that very gently, and I'm trying to find the shear of the boat so that it'll be sweet and it'll follow the hull. For most of it, it's about, it's vertical for most of it, but it has quite a bit of tumble home at the stern and at the bow. So when I get up to the bow, I have to be very careful that I run into this bull nose which allows me to be very careful. And I'm gonna get up in here and I'm gonna stop, and then I'm gonna use my sander because I don't want to get into that bull nose. There's some damage here that is just from age that I'm gonna go ahead and repair when I do the rest of the boat. So I will have lots of time to get that fixed. And then I'll put a better edge here underneath. So I'll get my rub rail fit and have it there. So when I do the rest of the hull, I have to re-sand it, look for some issues. I can go ahead and take it right up to the rub rail and know that I've found my last hull edge and where the rub rail will meet. So it'll look really nice when it's all done. So I'm gonna now do the other side, and hopefully we'll be done with the deck and we can move on to some other projects. Well, I finished up fairing around the shear using 120 with my Orbital really careful, and I even faired it into the hull. The hull has a lot of dings and things that I'm going to have to fix anyway, so I went ahead and just faired it right into the deck line, so it's a nice shear, it's fair. I can put the rub rail mahogany piece on there and I should have a really nice surface. So the next step will be for me to cut and then steam bend the mahogany inner rub rail, and that'll be the next video. Thank you for joining me. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the like button, and we'll see you next week.